In the holiness of this hour, suffused for all of us with precious and personal memories, and with sentiments of abiding love and respect, we've come together, family, friends, and colleagues, to honor the memory of Joseph Isidore Lieberman, a man of tremendous heart and intellect who dedicated his life to his family and to public service, to his community, to his state of Connecticut, and to his country. I'm Susan Schenkman, the Senior Rabbi of Washington Hebrew Congregation, and on behalf of the clergy, staff, lay leaders, and membership, I'm honored to welcome Senator Lieberman's family and all of you to Washington Hebrew. I was privileged to hear Senator Lieberman speak on this very bima nearly 23 years ago, and to learn from him in this sacred space that he honored with his presence and his words. This morning, we'll recall and reflect upon the many places he instilled with holiness during his lifetime. It is written that in every person there is a private shrine of memory and love, and in that sanctuary our loved ones abide. We sense their presence, caress their spirits, and enfold them in our hearts. They talk to us. They tell tales. Thus, the pain of separation is soothed by memory. The hurt sustained is healed by love, and we ourselves become purified and ennobled through our sorrow. We join together today to celebrate Senator Lieberman's life, his words and actions, and to express both consolation and thanksgiving for having been blessed by his presence in our lives, our nation, and our world. Jewish tradition instructs us to stand with those who mourn, so that they may feel the presence of the community. In recognition of our shared loss, we turn to words from our sacred scriptures that provide strength and comfort in this moment. We'll join in the words of Psalm 23. If these words are familiar to you, even if different from the version I'm reciting, please join me with the words that speak to you. With God as my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You guide me in right paths for the sake of your name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Amen.
Hadassah, to Joe's children, Hani, Matt, Rebecca, Ethan, to his sisters, Rietta and Ellen, to all of the grandchildren, Prime Minister Netanyahu, my fellow former Vice President Mike Pence, Mrs. Pence, to all my former colleagues in the Senate and the House, Leader McConnell and Elaine Chao especially, and to all of the distinguished guests. I'm here for one reason only: to honor Joe Lieberman and to bear witness to his remarkably faith-filled life, that it was so rich in kindness and decency, principle, and great achievements for his nation. We can say of Joe the very best we can say of any man. His was a life of constant consequence for his family, his friends, his nation. I knew Joe long before I had the honor of asking him to run alongside me in the election for president and vice president 24 years ago. I knew him when he was Attorney General of Connecticut. And then, of course, we became colleagues and allies and very, very close friends in the Senate. We shared views on many issues: the climate crisis, women's rights, gay and lesbian rights, human rights. So many causes that we fought together. We also were allies when we were sometimes in the small minority in our own political party. Back when he was a Democrat, we were some of the only ones that voted in favor of President George H.W. Bush's military action in Iraq. We were in the minority in our own party on some nuclear weapons issues, and we became very close. He had friends in both parties, as all of you know, and there are people from both parties here and will speak today. There's been talk recently of Venn diagrams in our country. I think the thinnest overlay of a Venn diagram between Democrats and Republicans is right there where Joe Lieberman is. He wrote about how I became a Shabbos Goy for him. And when the Senate would run overtime on Friday evenings and the Sabbath would begin, I often offered to take him over to an apartment my parents had in the Methodist building. Here's a Southern Baptist taking an observant Jew to the Methodist building and turning the lights on and then turning the lights off when I left and so forth. And anyway, we became extremely close. And then during that campaign of 2000, we became kin, really. Our families became kin too, Hadassah. We laughed together, and we fought like hell together, and we prayed together. We thought for a season we had won together. And I learned a lot from Joe, including a few words of Yiddish, and I was already familiar with the word mensch, but I did not know its full meaning until I got to be a good friend of Joe Lieberman. And if you want to know its full and true meaning, you can skip the dictionary and just look at the way Joe Lieberman lived his life. He put friendship over anger. He practiced reconciliation as a form of grace. I believe we can all learn from Joe's life some critical lessons about how we might heal the rancor in our nation today. I speak from personal experience because after that 2000 race, Joe and I developed some very deep disagreements on policy and political matters, and no matter how hard I tried or how hard Joe tried, we could not convince the other of the merit of our respective positions. And those of you who've had arguments with Joe know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not an accident that he would often break out into song, usually his favorite song, Frank Sinatra's My Way. How many people have heard him sing My Way? I know, yes, all right, that was a frequent occurrence on the campaign trail. And I've thought about those days a lot because in spite of our disagreements in those days, we both knew deep down that the strong foundation of our friendship and the values that we shared in common were so much stronger than what was driving us apart in those years. I've found myself thinking about Joe frequently over the last 3 months since he passed and since the service in Stanberry, Connecticut. And what stands out above everything else in my memories of Joe is the way that his Jewish faith was so foundational to the purpose with which he lived his life. I spent some time trying to capture that in my own words and did some research since the service in Connecticut. And ultimately, I found that he, not surprisingly, said it better than I possibly could. So if you will allow me, I would like to share with you some of Joe's words about the connection between his faith and his purpose. He wrote, "I was raised in a religiously observant family, which gave me the clear answers of faith to life's most difficult questions. My parents and my rabbi, Joseph Ehrenkrantz, taught me that our lives were a gift from God, the Creator, and with it came a covenantal obligation to serve God with gladness by living as best we could, according to the law and values that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai." He continued, "The summary of our aspirations was in the Hebrew phrase tikkun olam, which is translated to improve the world or to repair the world, or more boldly, to complete the creation which God began. In any translation, this concept of tikkun olam presumes the inherent but unfulfilled goodness of people and requires action for the benefit of the community." Now, I want to note that he was not naive in believing that his faith would automatically clear away all obstacles and lead to the success of any endeavor. He went on, speaking of tikkun olam, he said, "It accepts our imperfections and concludes that we as individuals and as a society are constantly in the process of improving and becoming complete. Each of us has the opportunity and responsibility to advance that process, both within ourselves and in the wider world around us." He quoted Rabbi Tarfon in the Talmud, who said, "The day is short and there is so much work to be done. You are not required to complete the work yourself, but you cannot withdraw from it either." And he concluded, "These beliefs were a powerful force in my upbringing and seem even more profound and true to me today." Even as a college student, he started the work of Tikkun Olam by going to the Deep South in a time of danger for those pushing for civil rights and voting rights there. He took this philosophy to heart on an issue that we worked on together, addressing the global climate crisis. He talked about how extreme events were becoming a more regular and now daily occurrence. He once said, "Today we can see with our own eyes what global warming is doing. And in that context, it becomes truly irresponsible, if not immoral, to not do something." By the way, yesterday was the hottest day in recorded history. It broke the record of one day earlier. Today may break it again. What to do? Joe argued, and I quote, "Global warming is not a conqueror to kneel before, but a challenge to rise to, a challenge we must rise to." And he was brimming with ideas on how we could solve this challenge. First and foremost, by putting a value on improving the world, on putting a value for the fate of future generations over politics. Just 2 years ago, Joe wrote of the urgent need for bipartisanship on the climate crisis. And for those of you gathered here who admired his commitment to the highest values and morals, listen, please. He said, "There is much more that our government will need to do to avoid future climate-caused disasters, and it will be done best if members of both parties are working together to find solutions." Here in America, we continue to grapple with the vitriol and fear that have threatened to drive us apart. Around the world, democracy is under threat. Humanity itself faces an existential crisis of our own making if we continue to use the sky as an open sewer. These parallel crises beg the question, can the world be repaired? Can we muster the courage to reject the rancor that threatens to define this current moment? I believe we can. I believe the concept of tikkun olam that was central to the life and work of Joe Lieberman can be found in all of the morally based movements that have characterized humanity's progress. In all those movements, advocates at times felt despair. But when the underbrush was cleared away and the central issue was defined as a choice between right and wrong, then at a very deep level, the outcome became foreordained. Repairing the world is our moral imperative. Joe Lieberman lived his life fully with a deep awareness and appreciation of that moral imperative and the responsibilities it required of him. So today, to remember him is to refresh not only our hope, but our dedication to Tikkun Olam. May God bless the Lieberman family.
Vice President Gore, Vice President Pence, senators, members of Congress, distinguished guests, above all, Hadassah and the Lieberman family, which has grown exponentially, I see. That's bringing the mitzvah of Pruvu multiply. It was important for me to be here today to express my deepest affection and respect for our beloved Joe Lieberman. I'm sure that, like all of you here, I miss Joe terribly. He left an indelible mark on me, just as he did on everyone who had the good fortune to know him. Joe was exceptional in so many ways. He was unfaltering in his integrity, his decency, his loyalty. He was an exemplary leader who combined clear and forceful convictions with a pragmatic approach to solving problems and to solving conflict. He was an American patriot and a proud Jew who steadfastly stood with Israel and the Jewish people, especially during trying times. And it's precisely during these trying times that I miss him even more. I met Joe in the early 80s when I was representing Israel in the United Nations, and he was Attorney General in Connecticut. And when we met, he said, "One day you'll be prime minister." And I said, "One day you'll be senator, or maybe president." Well, almost. But what struck me first when I met him was his moral clarity and his moral courage. This was apparent during his 24 years as senator and during his vice presidential candidacy. Over the years, we met countless times. I treasured his wise counsel, his right sense of humor. He had a way of saying it with a smile. The corner of his lips, he had the smile. I valued his unflagging friendship in good times and in bad. He was unwavering in defending Israel and expressed his support literally up to the end of his life, literally up to the end of his days. Hours before his passing, he was editing the final draft of a statement that he and Alan Dershowitz had co-authored backing Israel's war in Gaza. His last written words, I believe, were the following: "We believe that Israel must be allowed to achieve its legitimate goal of disabling Hamas. After October 7th, Joe understood that what was at stake in this war was the survival of the Jewish state and hence the survival of the Jewish people. Throughout his distinguished career, he also understood, as few do, how important the alliance between America and Israel was for the future of both countries. He knew that we must stand together against dangers that could threaten our common future. This is why he spent his last years as the head of an organization united against a nuclear Iran. He knew how dangerous our world would become if Iran were ever to develop and acquire nuclear weapons. Over the years, we often discussed how Iran was behind the entire axis of terror that threatened both our countries. He told this to Forbes magazine a few days after the October 7th savagery. He said, "Focus on the problem, which is Iran." This was quintessential Joe. Focused, clear-eyed, right to the point. Dear Hadassah, you and your family have lost a loving husband, father, and grandfather. America has lost one of its finest public servants. The Jewish people have lost one of its most noble sons. Israel has lost one of its greatest champions. And I have lost a beloved friend and an irreplaceable comrade in arms. We shall always remember Joe. May his memory be a true blessing. Yehi Zichro Baruch. I apologize. I have to go write a speech and then deliver it.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm used to people walking out when I get up to speak. Hadassah, family, friends, distinguished guests, colleagues, it is such an honor to join you in celebrating the life of a truly great American, my dear friend, Joe Lieberman. On the day that Joe died, I was speaking at a middle school in Western Maine. An 8th grader got up and asked me this question. Of all the senators that I had worked with over the years, who was the one that I accomplished the most with? After carefully noting that I had worked with many great senators, I answered the question, Joe Lieberman. Later that very same day, shortly after I got home, I learned that Joe had died. I was stunned, for only hours before, I had been touting his virtues to the students of Maine. If you ever wonder if one person can make a difference, just look at the legacy of Joe Lieberman. He was a prolific legislator who authored so many significant laws. There was landmark legislation to reorganize and strengthen our intelligence community in the wake of the attacks of 9/11. His work to repeal the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell law was a profile in courage. The bill to reform FEMA after the woeful response to Hurricane Katrina was yet another of his lasting accomplishments. Working with Joe was so satisfying because his nonpartisan persistence repeatedly yielded results. But Joe wasn't only a brilliant legislator. As Vice President Gore said, he was a mensch, a person of integrity, honor, compassion, and warmth. I saw those qualities time and again in his embrace of the families who lost loved ones on 9/11, in his determination to do what was right regardless of the political consequences, and in his love for his family, his friends, and his country. Joe also had a constant twinkle in his eye that reflected his marvelous sense of humor. How well I remember a lengthy conversation that Joe and I had on a long journey to Afghanistan about the relative burdens of Jewish guilt versus Catholic guilt. Joe finally won that argument. He said, "My people invented it, your people perfected it." Vintage Joe. We laughed so hard that we woke up John McCain, who was the leader of the Codel. It's so difficult for me, as I know it is for so many of you, to accept that Joe is no longer with us. Just a week before he died, agreed with one another. Joe's legacy will continue to learn so much from him. The prophet Isaiah said, "I have engraved you on the palms of my hands." Joe is engraved in our hearts forever. May his memory be a blessing. Thank you.
I learned today that his middle name was Isidore. His passing saved him a lot of grief. I can't believe I didn't know that. Oh, wow. I'm going to get through this, Hadassah. We all will. So the common bond, why are we all here? We love Joe, right? And he loved us. And to be loved by Joe Lieberman is an experience you will never, ever forget. His dad owned a liquor store. My dad owned a liquor store. Good training for the job in which we're talking about today. Good training for religious people. So I loved him like a brother, and I never had one. The Three Amigos. You can't see this, but you can come up and see it later. We're on some 130 going somewhere in Kevlar. John's reading a book. Joe is looking at his phone, and I'm asleep. That's the most accurate picture in the world about the three amigos. Now, how did this happen? You know, Al, you talked about your partner and all the things he did, and Susan, what a great summary of legislative accomplishments. But people got to remember, after 9/11, Joe changed. Joe was always a social liberal, always the nicest guy in the room, the smartest guy in the room. But after 9/11, that night, I talked to him going across the street. He said, Lindsey, boy, we can never let this happen again. And from that came the Three Amigos. And from that is the highlight of my life. So much to talk about in such a short period of time. Everybody's got a Dalai Lama story. Here's mine. We're at the Wailing Wall. This is how it begins. John's running for president. So me and Joe are just going wherever John goes and making it up as we go. So John is supposed to go to the Wailing Wall and Western Wall and put his hand out. And that's the money shot for the Israeli press. What did I learn at the Wailing Wall? Do not get between the Israeli press and John McCain. So they crushed me against the wall. And I began to wail. So it's actually, help me. Joe got me up. So I wrenched my knees. Fast forward, the next stop somehow is we meet the Dalai Lama in Colorado. You can't make this stuff up, right? So I'm sitting over in the corner because I can barely walk. And Joe brings the Dalai Lama over. And he says, I want you to meet my good friend, Lindsey Graham. I said, hey, Dolly. Hello. I don't know. What do you say to the guy? Hello, Dolly. He's hurt his knee. Can you help him? So he puts his hand on my knee. The Dalai Lama does, not Joe. And he goes, And he says, is it any better? And I said, no. And he said, I didn't think so. Anybody met Gaddafi? You didn't miss a lot. So, Susan, you might have been there. So, John had all these great ideas and some not so good. This was one of the not so good ideas. Let's go meet Gaddafi. I said, why? Well, anyway, so we go meet him. We drive around in the middle of the night and we go to this tent. And this guy's jacked up on everything you can put in a human body. And he's got Amazon women bodyguards, and I'm trying to find a way out of here. So he starts out talking about the great scourge of mankind. It's not climate change in his eyes. It was Switzerland. We're here with this nut job, surrounded by all these people with guns, and he went on and on about how we should dismember Switzerland and give it to the French, the Italians, and the Germans. And it was always John, Joe, and me. John quickly said, I'm going to let Joe speak first. Joe said, I never really thought about it that way, but I've learned a lot, and I appreciate having met you. So we live to tell about it. The last quick story. John read somewhere 500 people were killed in one of the stands protesting against the government. So John called me and Joe and said, we need to go. And I said, why? Joe said, 503 sounds better to John. There was no place that John and Joe wouldn't go to show up for all the right reasons. And I'm here to tell you it was the highlight of my life to be around those two guys doing things that mattered at a time of great peril, being able to laugh. Your husband, your grandfather, your father was the coolest dude on the planet to me because he could deliver Henny Youngman jokes, just endless jokes. I am so blessed to have known him. Adjective, he was humble, right? Confident. He knew Iran was bad and nobody was going to convince him otherwise. And he believed we should see it through in Iraq, and he's willing to lose for it. That's confidence. He had confidence in who he was and what he believed. He was kind incredibly kind to me, but strong. Strong to the point he would give what most of us would never think about giving up, our job in politics. That's strong. He was religious to the point of enough already. Do we have any Orthodox people here? Raise your hand. Too many rules. Joe could tell you when it was sundown any place on the planet on a Friday. I don't care where we were, he knew it was sundown. What did I learn? When it was sundown on Saturday, so we didn't have to do this anymore. So I learned a lot. Finally, Vice President Gore. Joe Lieberman convinced me from South Carolina to do a climate change bill with him and John Kerry, which means he's the most persuasive person on the friggin' planet. He sold me hook, line, and sinker, and the problem is real. And we met and we met and met and we talked and we talked and we talked, and Joe kept me in the game. And so what did I learn? A lot about climate change. And I got a restraining order against John Kerry. So that was an incredible experience. So from the time I met the man until the time he passed, I was better off for having met him. Hadassah, he was the love of your life. To the family, I know he's your patriarch and your rock. It ought to make you feel good to the grand. You're trying to save Social Security, honey. You're doing your part. To all the grandkids, I hope you'll listen to all the things being said about your granddad. He was a wonderful man, and one of the best things that ever happened to Lindsey Graham was to meet Joe Lieberman. So until we meet again, my amigo, God bless.
To Hadassah and the family, Vice President Gore, Vice President Pence, to all of the members of the Senate, House, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters. We all have gathered today to pay tribute and to memorialize the life, the legacy, and the liberating spirit of Joseph Lieberman, who was one of our nation's greatest statesmen and transformative leaders. I also stand to bear witness to the irrepressible commitment of Senator Lieberman to freedom, justice, and equality, democracy, civility, and bipartisanship. From my early days in the civil rights movement as a youth organizer with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, under the leadership of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I experienced firsthand the sacred solidarity and unity between blacks and Jews in America, who were on the front line advocating for freedom and equality for all. I saw the steadfast embrace between Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr., along with a host of other American Jewish and black leaders who prayed together, marched together, and in some tragic moments, died together for voting rights and civil rights. For the decades of sturdy leadership and presence of Joe Lieberman as a fearless advocate for the oneness and for the freedom of all humanity, he was certainly admired not only by me, by others throughout the continuing civil rights movement. Last year, at the observance of the 60th anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington, Senator Lieberman and I shared a few special personal moments together as we reflected on the purpose and the impact of the March on Washington for freedom, justice, and jobs. Early one morning, last August, the two of us actually went back to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial here in Washington, and we walked together along the reflecting pool. We both began to remember about how it felt to stand there together 60 years ago, and now to weigh the progress that our nation has made toward racial justice and equality. But last August, we also discussed the current resurgence of racism and anti-Semitism in America, and the urgent need to renew and to rebuild the strong national coalition between blacks and Jews across the United States, and to work harder to fight against anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred. As a result, we began to build a framework for the establishment of that national coalition that is now named the Black Jewish Action Alliance, BJAA. Finally, over the past 2 years, I had the distinct honor and privilege of working closely with Joe Lieberman as co-chair of No Labels. His wisdom, his perseverance on the questions of how to shape a better future for our nation and for the world by learning from the past, not repeating the past. We will always, and Joe's principles were always on point. Now we must keep alive the principles that he lived by as we continue to declare the oneness of our humanity. In the Bible, it is noted that Joseph and Benjamin were brothers. Forever, Joe and I will be soul brothers. To Hadassah and the family, we love you, we respect you. Long live the legacy, long live the spirit of Joseph Lieberman.
Hadassah, Matt, Becca, Hani, and Etan, and the rest of Senator Lieberman's family, it's a privilege to be with you here today. Prime Minister Netanyahu is here, Vice President Gore, Vice President Pence, Leader McConnell, distinguished senators, members of Congress. It's a great honor to be before you, and I know we're all here because of the grace of Joe Lieberman. Many of the remembrances honoring Senator Lieberman's life have highlighted his legacy as one of the great post-Cold War statesmen, or the fact that when he was the first Jewish American to be nominated by a major political party as Vice President of the United States. Senator Lieberman was never afraid to speak his mind. I think we've heard that. And he was not afraid to be the voice of the opposition to any policy or action in which he disagreed. But in his principled advocacy on any issue, he acted with elegance, wisdom, and wit. No major recent figure so plainly rejected the animus and bile that consumes modern American politics. He was immune from the peaks of anger or outrage that flare up among the best of the rest of us. We all have in common a profound and enduring respect for this giant in American polity. His vast career achievements are worth celebrating, to be sure, but what made the senator truly exceptional was his sheer humanity. His sheer humanity. His civility, grace, wisdom, love of family, and the ability to convey his beliefs in a calm, respectful, yet powerful manner. Look at the list of those who attended his funeral at the end of March in Stamford, Connecticut. Vice President Gore, various senators, former staffers, a raft of colleagues in Connecticut state politics, and Governor Ned Lamont, his one-time political opponent. What all of them have in common, besides fiercely opposing Senator Lieberman on one issue or another during his career, is their profound and enduring respect for the man whose memory they were there to celebrate. And even in death, Senator Lieberman's grace brings out the best of us, brings us together. Vice President Gore, thank you for being here. And I never thought, as a former political opponent, that I would be so proud to have shared this stage with you and what you've said about my friend and your friend. It's an honor. I first got to know the senator, and this is the complicated part, Mr. President. I first got to know the senator as a political foe in the infamous Florida recount that determined the outcome of the 2000 presidential election. He was well aware of my role as a bit player on behalf of then Governor George W. Bush in election offices, on television, and in courtrooms. And although he was known for his sense of humor, I always felt a bit sheepish whenever he occasionally teased me about that role in the recount. I remain a proud friend of President Bush, who shares all of our sentiments for Senator Lieberman, but I was quite cognizant that the recount derailed my close friend's historic bid for the second highest office in the land and Vice President Gore's bid for the presidency. The last time Senator Lieberman joked with me about the recount, he sensed my discomfort because I was uncomfortable, and he didn't want to see his friend uncomfortable. And he said, "You know, Mark, don't fret too much about this whole recount business," he told me. "If we had won one or more states here or there, the outcome of Florida wouldn't have mattered one bit. Only upon his death did I learn that he had arranged for me to be a pallbearer at his funeral. I was so honored by the request. His extraordinary generosity of character persisted beyond his tragic death. My friendship with the senator developed further when I had the privilege of working for his friend and colleague, John McCain. John McCain's wit, of course, was second to none in politics, and his Borscht Belt jokes with Senator Lieberman, often at Senator Lieberman's expense, were legion. McCain used to joke that it was now, this is straight from the Lindsey book of here. McCain used to joke that it was now time to fully convert to Judaism, having gone through so many Jewish experiences with his friend. Senator Lieberman, of course, equally wry response was always to remind Senator McCain that a bris was an essential element of Jewish conversion. I'd like to hear what Lindsey Graham has to say about that, but yeah. Senator McCain, like Senator Lieberman, was a great storyteller and capable of serious reflection. Before the vice presidential selection process and the start of the Republican National Convention in 2008, I was with Senator McCain at his cabin in Sedona, doing my best to assist at his famous barbecue, or at least not get in the way. The conversation eventually turned to our mutual friend, Senator Lieberman. This was just before the selection of the vice president. And McCain stopped the stream of his political commentary, the staccato. He's always going and fascinating. And he grew quiet, and he stopped, almost laid down the barbecue tools. And he said, "Joe is good," he said simply. He is just good. And when I say this, I get tingles, I'm sorry, but I remember it so vividly. The great John McCain saw in his friend a goodness, Lindsey knows this Senator Collins has seen this, that we all, including him, aspired to. Even when John McCain passed over Senator Lieberman for the vice presidential nomination in the heat of the campaign, the senator from Connecticut did not hesitate to assist Sarah Palin as she stepped onto the national stage. I will never forget the mock debate. It was only the three of us in the room, where Senator Lieberman played the part of then Vice President Joe Biden, and I played the late, great Gwen Ifill. It was a particularly challenging moment in the campaign, as you recall, although challenging moments are being redefined in campaigns right now. With Governor Palin facing the full brunt of media scrutiny, I saw firsthand the care, concern, and empathy with which Senator Lieberman embraced the governor and talked her through the context of that difficult time. In that moment, they weren't a senator and a governor, nor even two vice presidential nominees. They were just two people talking, balanced by the senator's wisdom, experience, and serenity. It was a human moment that is so lost today. The selflessness and humility he displayed toward Governor Palin were typical of Senator Lieberman. In a world where success has 1,000 authors, he stood out for his belief that service and good work were enough and that credit was of little importance. It was an honor to share this stage with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and all of our thoughts are with Israel at this time. He would likely recall in 2018 that Senator Lieberman and I, in a bit role, convened a secret meeting in our work as leaders of United Against Nuclear Iran, of Arab and Israeli intelligence chiefs and high-ranking members of the Trump administration, including Ambassador Bolton, who's here today. This first-of-its-kind meeting focused on cooperation and security and stability in the region, and it led to additional discussions that ultimately culminated in the Abraham Accords. That first meeting, hosted by Senator Lieberman and Ioanni, was never publicly disclosed. We didn't talk about it. The senator was so proud to play a role in helping to normalize relations between Arabs and Jews, but he was adamant that those who coordinated the many subsequent meetings and agreements deserved the credit. In his mind, the work itself was rewarding enough. Claiming public authorship was unnecessary. And look, at the risk of treading on that sensibility, I was really torn about how to say this. I mentioned this extraordinary and historical example of his devotion to service and repairing the world because its significance was in part built upon his unparalleled selflessness. Despite Senator Lieberman's insistence on being referred to as Joe, I couldn't help but address him as a senator. I always called him the senator. My apologies to the other senators in the room. He exemplified what it meant to be a great public servant, and that is how I will always remember him. Whenever I had the privilege of introducing him, we did a lot of events together, and I had the privilege of introducing him frequently. I would always conclude with an inside joke between the two of us. I would say and identify him, the national treasure, Senator Joseph Lieberman. He would smile at me with that smile, walk up to the stage, and he would say, "Mark, you've got to save that for my funeral." He'd retort, always sparking some laughter from the audience. And if he were here to respond to the outpouring of kind words that have been heaped upon him following his passing, I'm sure he would say something like this: "Mark, couldn't you have waited a little longer to use that line, like 10 years? Because that's would be his joke. I've used that joke, and as Joe would say, it gets better every time, at least amongst the two of us. Ultimately, his family provided his bedrock. His wife, Hadassah, was truly his partner in caring, wisdom, kindness, and generosity. And his children and grandchildren were everything to him. Every discussion I had, I got the update. I felt I knew, I didn't know some of you, but I felt I knew you. The senator and Hadassah were a team, and she was his essential person in all they accomplished together. He was a father to me. But that was his gift, and certainly a burden for Hadassah and his children, as they had to share him broadly. But I'm not alone in the feeling of that close relationship with him. I'm sure many others feel that in this room. His wisdom and warmth were bestowed on so many. And like Lindsey, I have to have something to show, a picture. And this was the man. This is a picture from Senator Lieberman's high school yearbook. There were sideburns, right? And I want to read just briefly from that yearbook. Joseph I. Lieberman, Joe, Mr. Personality, presided over senior and sophomore classes, a cappella choir, synagogue youth group, active member of school council, debating club, co-founder of the jazz club, editor of the Pilot Wheel, honor roll student, won Princeton Leadership Award, always a kind word for everyone. A successful future assured. Hadassah, Matt, Becca, Hani, and Aitan, so many of us shared the center with you. Today, we are here for you. May the memory of our national treasure, Senator Joseph Lieberman, be a blessing. Israel, hi. The United States misses him. His family misses him. And so do I. Thank you very much.
Hadassah Lieberman and the wonderful Lieberman family, Vice President Gore, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Vice President Pence, and all the other honored guests who are here. Working with Senator Joe Lieberman across 46 years was one of my greatest honors and blessings. I've been asked to pay tribute to him on behalf of the many staffers he touched. And for that, I thank Hadassah and the Lieberman family. I began with Senator Lieberman when he was the Connecticut State Majority Leader, Senate Majority Leader in the late 70s, and then in the Attorney General's office, and later as his last and longest Chief of Staff in the U.S. Senate, and then for 11 years with the Kasowitz law firm. And of course, as you know, there were plenty of campaigns in between. When he passed, I emailed over 350 Lieberman Senate staffers, many of whom are here today, part of a family we called Lieber staffers. The response came pouring in and was heartbreaking, awe-inspiring, and unbelievable. One said it was the honor of my life to get to know and work with him. Another described him as one of the finest public servants our nation has ever seen, who was, quote, full of integrity, but also wit and warmth. Several said the senator changed the trajectory of their life and career, with one saying, all I have done was built on the foundation of what I learned in the Lieberman office. Another noted, and this one really touched me, the senator made me a better person, father, husband, and friend. So as those emails flew in, you could feel the strong sense of love and admiration that the staffers through the years felt for him. Senator Lieberman loved celebrating birthdays. He loved a good joke, as we've heard, or a twist of phrase. And he would also break out in song when the mood struck him, as we've heard. He'd walk in a room with that smile, that glint in his eye, and immediately provide calm and put everyone at ease. So many staffers commented on his core decency. And here's one thing you probably did not know about him. Whenever we worked in the same office, I always had a big bowl of candy and a basket of fruit for the staff.
Well, almost every day, he would stop by my office and grab a red apple, and we'd talk about the pressing issues of the day and the matters we were working on. And before too long, you could see that he had eaten the entire apple, core and all. He loved red apples. He shaped my life in ways I can scarcely put into words. I'll never forget when he asked me to be his counsel in the Attorney General's office in 1982, if you can think back that far. There were not many women attorneys, ladies, in the office back then, around 7 or 8, if I recall. My goodness, they didn't even have computers in the office then. I told him that we were hoping to have another child, and I knew I would need to take time off for that. He quickly said, "No problem, Clarin. You can just put a crib in your office." We chuckled, and that was the end of the conversation, and I knew he'd provide all the support I needed. But he also did the same thing for staff who had health issues. When he had 2 brothers working with him in the Senate, and one was diagnosed with cancer, he allowed the other to go to all of his health appointments with him. These were the actions of a person who was exceedingly dedicated to family and ensured that the staffers had the time and space to prioritize their families too. Senator Lieberman believed he had a solemn responsibility to help and serve the public, a true public servant. He cultivated an almost academic environment in our offices and expected the highest quality legal work and public policy work and constituent service. And as has been mentioned, the casework team operated under the Jewish principle of Tikkun Olam, dedicated to repairing the world one case at a time. He believed that ensuring that a senior citizen in Hartford, Connecticut, received their Social Security benefit on time was as crucial as the more high-profile elements of his office. I believe Senator Lieberman will forever be known as the moral conscience of the Senate. He had a unique sixth sense. I saw it the first time I met him, that innately tapped into the concerns and aspirations of everyday citizens. And he always elevated any conversation he was a part of to tap into our better angels. He also chose to engage in common sense problem solving instead of finger pointing, knowing that he needed to work in a bipartisan way and develop trust with all of his colleagues across the aisle and others to secure a successful solution for the country. He was in it to make a difference. I have no doubt that Senator Lieberman will be regarded as one of the most historic figures of the 20th and 21st centuries. First and foremost, the senator devoted his life to America, taking heed of his hero, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who implored us to ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. The senator was a doer who believed in America and its founding values of freedom, human rights, opportunity, democracy, and equal justice under the law. And he was all about advancing those values in every part of his public service for our country, a constant doer for our country always. When Senator Lieberman left the Senate, he, of course, continued to give his time and energies to boards and commissions concerned about the critical long-term domestic and international challenges of the day. But I don't know how many of you know or are aware of this. He also created a college scholarship program for outstanding Connecticut high school seniors with his remaining campaign funds, both to thank Connecticut and give back to Connecticut, and to support future generations of leaders. And he, of course, continued his mission to repair the world by chairing No Labels and seeking ways to bridge the political divides in America. He also continued to be a voice of reason and morality in our public life. For all that and much more, Senator Lieberman is a giant to all of us who have been part of the Lieber staff team in Connecticut or in the U.S. Senate. Thank you, Senator. Some of us may be wondering what you're doing up there right now. I, for one, have you munching on a big red apple with angels swarming around you like the office staffers used to do outside my office door, just to catch a quick conversation with you about how better to understand what exactly is happening down here on earth. And I imagine you are still doing, too, by having robust discussions with St. Peter and others there about how best the broader faith community could address America's political and other crises right now. Senator Lieberman, your memory is a blessing to all of us who had the good fortune to work with such an outstanding and consequential leader, public servant, mentor, and boss. And from me, a friend, Godspeed.
I want to thank everyone for joining with us to memorialize the love of my life, Senator Joseph Isidore Lieberman, my Joey. And I have to tell you quickly that to have you around and to see your faces, so many of you, and your words, and this has been very hard. And everyone's been saying, oh, you're handling it so well. Oh, you're handling it so well. Today, I just reached the limit. I couldn't handle it as well. And then your words and your steadfast support and respect were beautiful, and they give me strength, and I need strength now. So thank you for your love and respect for Joey. And now I think we as a family want to come together, and Matt will begin as the eldest son.
So as everyone's coming up, for as long as any of us can remember, we would finish our Passover Seders every year late at night or sometimes in the early morning with our dad leading us in a rousing, if somewhat ragged, rendition of God Bless America. It's a song that he loved, and it's a feeling that he felt so deeply. And so we thought it would be fitting to end our time here together in his patriotic spirit, singing that song, all of us together. So if you're able, please rise. The lyrics are on the facing page. God bless microphone. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining the National Memorial Service for Senator Joseph I. Lieberman. We ask that you remain seated while the family and speakers depart the sanctuary.